In this episode of Ask Paul Kirtley, I've collated questions about cold weather camping, cold weather clothing, cold weather shelters, and all my answers are in this episode. Welcome to episode 41 of Ask Paul Kirtley. I'm in Scotland. I have just completed two trips down the River Spey, which I co-lead with Ray Goodwin under the auspices of Frontier Bushcraft. We've had a good couple of trips, canoeing trips, and it's been a great time of year to be up here. I'm into my third week in Scotland now, and you can really see the changes. When we arrived 3 weeks ago, it was literally t-shirt weather. It was like the middle of summer. It was unseasonably warm, and it's got progressively colder and colder, and it's become progressively more autumnal as well. Things were a bit behind when we first arrived, but now the birches have gone a full golden yellow. The larches are turning a nice yellow colour, and we've had some other fantastic colour down in the valleys from beech and from oaks, as well as aspens. There's been some fantastic colours from aspens this year, golden yellows, but also some pinks and reds, and it's been a very colourful few weeks, and it continues to be very spectacular. Loads and loads of berries up here this year as well. Loads of rowan berries and some of the other sorbus as well. I saw some white beam and some Swedish white beam the other day. Lots and lots of berries on everything this year, and yeah, just very autumnal. Hasn't been that frosty yet. We've had a few nights with frost here. I'd have expected more by this time in October, but it is what it is. But we're starting to get some frosts. It's certainly starting to feel a bit cooler, and the hat is back. It's a good opportunity to talk about some more cold weather aspects of being outdoors, but as we go into the shorter days and colder weather. There's a few things on my blog at the moment around that topic as well, so check those out. And there will be a few video blogs or wild wanderings, etc., about my time up here in Scotland as well, and some of the things that I've been doing. So check those out on my blog as well, at paulkirtley.co.uk. If you're listening on the podcast, you can go over there, see the latest blogs. If you're watching on YouTube, again, go over to paulkirtley.co.uk, check out the latest blogs there. Right, without further ado, because we've got quite a few questions to get through, I'm going to start. The first one is from Tony Hunt, and it's not really a question, as he admits himself. Hi Paul, not really a question, but thought you might like to mention the dangers of using gas stoves, hexamine stoves, etc. in tents. A few years ago, a friend of mine died from carbon monoxide poisoning using a gas lamp in a tent. Maybe a few people out there do not realise the risk. Enjoy your show as always, Tony. Yeah, absolutely. And I have put a few things on my blog about camping in heated tents, and you do need to be careful about carbon monoxide poisoning in tents that have some sort of heat source, particularly a wood stove or a lantern or similar. And generally, if you've got an enclosed space that's relatively airtight, you don't want to have a stove in there, you don't want to have a lantern in there. With heated tents, canvas tents like the tent teepees and the snow trekker tents and the bell tents with stoves in them, there is a chimney which takes exhaust gases outside, but it doesn't mean to say that carbon monoxide can't build up inside the tent. You can get small electronic carbon monoxide alarms, a little bit like smoke alarms that you have in your home, and they're very useful, because if you don't know about carbon monoxide is scentless, it's colourless, and you don't know that it's there. And the way that it kills you is basically your red blood cells prefer to have carbon monoxide adhered to them than oxygen. So you basically starve yourself of oxygen by breathing in carbon monoxide, and you become asphyxiated effectively. And it's not a nice way to go. So you do need to be vigilant, and the way that you're vigilant is not by checking for the gas, you have to make sure, unless you've got an alarm, you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And the right thing is generally having a stove. You know, if you've got a camping stove, that has to be outside the tent. It has to be outside the snow shelter where it's got plenty of oxygen around it, and you're not consuming the oxygen, giving out carbon monoxide as well as carbon dioxide, and ending up without enough oxygen in there in that enclosed space. With heated tents, you need one of your signs is smoke coming in, and you're not going to get carbon monoxide coming in generally without there being smoke, because most of the exhaust gases are going out. So when we camp in heated tents, we generally have a fire watch. We have somebody who is going to sit in front of the stove, making sure the tent's nice and warm, feeding the stove, making sure that the tent's not getting too warm, that the chimney's not getting too hot, that you might have a tent fire, set fire to the canvas. But equally, if there's lots of smoke blowing back into the tent, there might be a crosswind across the top of the chimney, then that can, when the stove's low, blow smoke back into the tent. If you're all asleep, that can introduce noxious gases as well, which you don't want to be breathing in, including carbon monoxide. So having somebody that's able to manage the stove, keep it running cleanly, keep the place smoke free, is a really good way of avoiding the main dangers of having a wood burning stove in a canvas tent. And that's something that I would recommend that you do. In the long nights of winter, it gets dark early, it gets light late, you can still get 7 or 8 hours of sleep and have everyone do a fire watch. So you might have 10 hours where people are going to be sleeping, and if there are 4 of you in the tent, you can each do a 2-hour fire watch and you can each get 8 hours sleep. It's not that much of a difficulty. You just decide who's going to be next, and then when you've got that 2 hours, it's quite, you know, apart from putting the firewood into the stove, you've got time to write notes, time to write a diary, time to read, time to reflect on your trip. It's quite a good a little bit of me time when you're actually living in quite close proximity with other people all the time. So having that little bit of space, 2 hours to yourself, 2 hours to your own thoughts, 2 hours of peace and quiet, it's actually really quite pleasant. It's not that much of an onerous task. So I'd thoroughly recommend, if you're living in a heated tent in the winter, have a fire watch. And then if you're in a quinzhee or a snow cave, do not have a stove running inside. It's a big danger. Don't have a gas lantern running inside. Have a candle. There's enough light from a candle and enough warmth actually from a candle to raise the temperature to a more comfortable level. Clearly you don't want it to be too high within a snow shelter, because you start to melt the snow and you get drips and you get moisture in your sleeping kit, etc, etc. So a candle gives you lots of light, reflects off the inside, a nice warm glow, can raise the temperature a few degrees, and if it starts flickering and not getting enough oxygen, it also tells you that there isn't enough oxygen in the shelter. So that's a good thing to have. You should always have something inside your snow shelter where you can have, there's an air vent, you can clear it, so a walking pole or a ski pole that you can clear, or at least a snow shovel handle where you can clear the hole that the air is going to come in. That's useful to have as well, and very important. And of course you should have a shovel inside your snow shelter as well in case it collapses or the front gets snowed over, so you can dig your way out. But that's a slight aside. So generally do not have stoves, lanterns, fires in enclosed spaces, because you are at risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. So that is a good starting point from Tony Hunt. If that's worried you about, say, having a fire inside a group shelter in the woods, like a debris, like a bunch of lean-tos with a fire in the middle, there is so much air coming in through holes in the top, holes in the side, holes in the door. You're not that hermetically sealed in there that you're going to have any problems getting enough oxygen there. It's very sealed shelters, like closed tents, closed snow shelters, that are the big issue there. And equally, it's the same way that people sitting in their garages with the engine running to stay warm, keeping the heater on. Maybe they've locked themselves out the house, they park the car in the garage, they leave the engine running, they keep the heater on. The garage is filling up with carbon monoxide from the exhaust of the car. People have died from staying warm that way as well. So whenever you've got combustion in an enclosed space, you should be trying to avoid that. You want to get out of that situation. You do not want to be in an enclosed space with combustion going on where the exhaust gases are in that space. That is a way to die a fairly unpleasant and unnecessary death. Right. Got another question here, and I think I've answered it actually, from Greg Langer. Greg asks, well, he says, as always, thank you for producing brilliant content. You're very welcome, Greg. And here he is talking specifically about some of the snow shelter material that I've put out on video. There was one video particularly about building a quinzhee. I've also had some material in my Fjell Tour film about the ski tour that we did in Norway a few years back, where we had particularly bad weather. Amongst other things we did on that trip, we dug a snow shelter. So there's been a few things about snow shelters on my blog and on my material in the past. And Greg asks here specifically about the snow shelter. I was watching your bushcraft film about building the snow shelter and became curious of precautions around carbon monoxide in a snow shelter. I know ventilation is necessary, but how does one ensure that the vents do not get drifted in or plugged? Is the easier solution to simply put the candles heat source out before you fall asleep? I'm very curious of your techniques on the matter, as I've been considering trying a night out in a snow shelter this coming winter. All right, Greg, so I think I've kind of partly answered your question already, but just to be clear about the answers to that specific question, there's a light aircraft coming over, but hopefully it doesn't pick up too much on the microphone. The answer is that you're not going to be at risk from a candle, and actually a candle is beneficial because, as I mentioned in the previous point, you can use it as an indicator that it is not getting enough oxygen. It is not, burning a candle is not going to give off so much carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide that it's going to be a problem. It burns very slowly, it burns a small amount. It's not going to be a problem. And if it does start flickering, if it's struggling to burn properly, if it's struggling to combust properly, that's a sign that there's not enough oxygen in your shelter. And it's normally when it's getting down, normal amount in air is about 21%. As it's dropping below 20, 18, towards 16, that's when things stop burning properly. So that will give you an indication that there's not enough oxygen in there. In terms of ventilation, yes, absolutely. Clearly you want to be warm in a snow shelter, so you don't want it open to the elements where you're getting lots of cold air coming in, but you do want some ventilation because otherwise it becomes quite stale in there. There's lots of carbon dioxide from you breathing, and you want to make sure you got some fresh air coming in. So the way you normally do that, for example, with most snow shelters is, to start with, you want to be up and away from the lowest part of the shelter, and then you'll have a cold well in the bottom. So the coldest air will drop there, and that's normally at the same level or slightly higher than the door. The door can drop down because again then cold air can drop down and out of the door. What we normally do is put a rucksack or a couple of day sacks in the doorway. Now that's not going to completely seal it because they don't match the shape perfectly, but it will stop drafts coming in, but it will allow some oxygen and cold air to drop out. What you then want to be able to do is suck some cold or fresh air in, not too much of course, but enough for breathing. So if you think about the size of a breathing hole, if you had to breathe through the snow, you want something where you can comfortably breathe through that, and if there's a couple of you, enough for you to do that. So what we find is if you take the shaft of a snow shovel, for example, and put a hole in, not directly over any of the sleeping platforms, because then you get cold air coming down directly onto you, normally away towards your feet, away from you, over the cold well, you'll get cold air dropping in, fresh air from outside, cycling through, and the cold air dropping out, and that will flush out any staleness. So, and in terms of keeping that from drifting over, having something inside to keep it clear. Now, a ski pole can be good, poke that through. An extended snow shovel handle can be good, poke that through. Something like that, keep that inside the shelter. And as I say, you also want to keep a snow shovel inside the shelter as well. I've certainly had it where the door has drifted over, where you've then had to dig your way out in the morning. in terms of the candle, you can keep that running. Use the sort of long burn, the sort of 9-hour candles. Make a little shelf for the candle somewhere in the middle. If say it's a 2-person shelter, I'm sleeping on this side, somebody else is sleeping on that side, cold well in the middle, back of the shelter. Put the candle in there, gives a nice light. You can keep it running all night, and if you wake up, you can check that it's not flickering. But as I say in the previous question, just don't have gas stoves, you know, sort of camping stoves, whether it's gas or white gas or petrol or diesel or kerosene or anything else like that burning inside such a sealed shelter. That's a real hazard, and it's not something that you should be doing. And with a snow shelter, just thinking that you said candle struck heat source, with a snow shelter you don't want a heat source in there. Candle is enough. You being in there will help raise the temperature. Candle will help raise the temperature. You don't want it above about 0, because then your shelter starts to melt from the inside out. Right, next question. Food for exhausting day hikes in Norwegian mountains. Now, this isn't specifically about cold weather, but calories are more important in colder times, and not getting exhausted is more important in the shorter days. You need to get to where you need to be with the energy that you need to have in colder weather. That's more critical in colder temperatures than it is in balmy summer temperatures. So Michael Puffer asks, hi Paul, I'm living in Norway and we spend a good part of our summer holidays hiking in the mountains. Unfortunately, where I live and hike in mid-Norway, mountains aren't very rocky, but have a lot of marshy areas, which makes travelling quite exhausting. On our last day hike, where we hiked for several hours to cover about 10 kilometres in such terrain, I got really exhausted and felt totally tapped of energy. It was very difficult to move forward and keep going, although our goal for the day was already in sight, but still 2 kilometres away. This didn't have anything to do with dehydration because we were drinking a lot of water during the day, but I think I was really just running out of energy. So therefore, I was wondering if you could give me some tips on how to prevent such situations and how to deal with them. What food should I eat before, during and after exhausting hikes that keep me going? Thanks a lot for your help in advance. I'm a big admirer of your work. Best regards, Michael. Okay, Michael. Well, I'm going to have to make a few assumptions here about you and a few other aspects. I'm assuming you're reasonably fit. You're talking about wanting to cover, you know, quite a few kilometres, not tons by anybody's standards, but a reasonable number. But a few things just to check off first. If you are not fit for hiking, then you would find that sort of rough terrain hiking pretty hard going. Where I am in Scotland at the moment, you get into the hills here, there's a lot of peat hags, you're dropping down into eroded peat bog, you having to climb out on wet terrain, go a little way, drop down again. It can be meters and meters up and down as well in some places. It's almost like doing an assault course, covering, you know, trying to cover a straight line in some places. And in that type of terrain, it is very tiring. You don't get into a rhythm with your walking, you're getting wet, and at the end of the day, when you've already walked quite a long way, it can be quite frustrating as well. So I think in your mind, you probably need to separate, is it frustration? Is it exhaustion? Is it just you want to be there and you're not there already? And it's interesting that you say you can see the end in sight in this instance, but it was hard going in the first place. And sometimes that can be the hardest. You know that you're nearly there, but it's really, really tough. That can be psychologically harder than just getting through it and then carrying on, because you've got the rest of the day to go. If in your head you're thinking, well, I'm only a couple of kilometers away, I should be there in 30 minutes, and then you come across something that's really difficult to cover and it takes you 2 hours, that can be quite demoralizing unless you have a bit of a word with yourself. So separate out those things as well. When it comes down to food, you say you were well hydrated, you say you're drinking lots of water. Lots of water means different things to different people. In summer conditions, when it's breezy but warm, you're sweating, you want to be drinking 3 litres of water per day at least. Get a litre of water in you, at least half a litre first thing, litre of water into you in the morning, drink a litre during the day, get another litre in the evening. Often that's not enough. On long hot summer hikes I would be drinking half a litre to a litre in the morning, and I'll probably drink 2 or 3 litres during the day if I'm walking from say 9 until 6, and then I'm certainly going to get more fluid into me in the evening. Not too close to bedtime because that makes you need to get up for a pee, but once I've stopped I'm going to make a big mug of tea. I'm going to have some food that's quite sloppy. I might have a soup, so get some fluids and some nutrients into me, as well as then the main meal. And if you're hiking in an area that's quite boggy or it's got streams, there isn't going to be any shortage of water, so make sure you are getting that in. So again, you said you were drinking plenty of water, but just to be sure, 3 to 5 litres a day in those sorts of conditions to make sure you're in as good a condition the next day as possible. In terms of food, think about the number of calories that you need. Most grown men need at least 2,500 calories per day. And if you're working hard, particularly if you're doing steep hills or carrying load, you may need more than that. If you're not eating enough carbohydrate, you won't burn your fats efficiently, so you want to make sure you've got enough carbs. And to start off with, the day before, you want to make sure that you're eating complex carbohydrates, so your glycogen is topped up, your glycogen is stored in your liver, some in your muscles and a little bit in your blood. So make sure your glycogen is topped up. You know, a pasta meal or a rice meal, based meal the night before your hike will get you started. Then you want something in the morning that's going to keep you going. Again, it doesn't have to be exclusively carbohydrates, but you want some carbs in there, maybe some porridge oats, maybe some wholemeal bread and some eggs or something like that's going to keep you going for a long time. Or some granola that's got nuts, it's got fruit, it's got some carbs in there, as you know, in terms of wheat and other grains, as well as some fat, and it's tasty with a bit of milk or juice or something that's going to give you plenty of energy to start during the day, to keep you going during the day, but start you off well. Then you want to have a reasonable lunch. I don't like having big lunches when I'm hiking. I tend to eat oat biscuits when I'm hiking. I'll have a few with a bit of cheese or something, or a small packet of tuna at lunchtime. And other than that, when I'm walking, I will just have snacks if I feel like I need them and if I feel like my blood sugar is dropping. Because remember, if your blood sugar drops too low when you're hiking, that's when you start to make mistakes of judgment as well. Your brain needs and runs primarily, unless you train it otherwise, it runs primarily on glucose, and you need to make sure that your blood sugar is high enough to provide the glucose to your system. And if you're burning a lot in your muscles, if you're burning a lot of your blood sugar in your muscles, then maybe your brain isn't getting enough. You start making mistakes with navigation, timings, all those sorts of things, and you get more irritable as well. So keeping your blood sugar up is worthwhile. In the first instance, you want to be eating relatively complex carbohydrates. I find cereal bars, granola bars, ones that aren't too sweet. A lot of those breakfast bars have a hell of a lot of simple sugars in them. They're not great. So, you know, like a granola bar, or some of the healthy bars, the organic bars that are more complex with less sugar in, are better. Or something like dried banana chips are good. Some nuts are good because, again, they're not really carbs, but there's a slow drip of fat in there. So a mixture of snacks. And you know, one of the classic things, and there's a reason it's a classic, is make up a trail mix. Make up a mix of dried fruit. So you could put raisins and sultanas in there. You can put some dried banana, maybe coated in coconut oil, chuck that in. Some people like dried apricots, although a lot of them contain a lot of sulfuric acid and other issues. But you know, as long as you don't have too much of any one thing, it's not going to be an issue. So put your preferred dried fruit, some nuts, maybe some M&Ms or similar in there, and you've got, or chocolate buttons or something like that. Shake it all up, and then just grab, when you're feeling a bit low, grab a handful of that in your face, slurp of water, and on you go. That's one of the best things to be doing on a hike. And you look forward to the different flavors. You've got a lot of variety in there, so that's something to be eating. And then when you get to camp or a cabin or wherever you're going in the evening, again, try and stock up. So make sure you're having a meal that has some carbohydrates in there, so rehydrated potato, some rice, some pasta, anything like, not all of them, but one of those, plus some protein and something that's going to be tasty, all mixed up. Make sure you've got plenty. Work out the calories, particularly if you're doing multi-day hikes. Work out the calories. There's a video on my YouTube channel, I will link to it, and also a video, it's on my blog as well, and there's also an article on my blog with further information about the calorie and macronutritional content of a menu that I put together from things just from the supermarket, so not from specialist camping foods, which many of are good if you buy the right ones, but this is just relatively inexpensive, off the supermarket shelf, which is applicable in many parts of the world. You can pull that together, and that menu is a 7-day menu which will fit into a large 10-litre side pocket of a rucksack, the PLCE side pocket. And for those people who've asked what PLCE mean, it just means personal load carrying equipment. It's just a British military term for a standard zip system which fits onto a standard rucksack with that zip system. So any PLCE pouch will fit onto a PLCE equipped rucksack. So the idea was to get a whole week's menu in that side pocket, and you can do that at about 3,000 calories a day. If you need more than that, then clearly you're going to need more space, but you can do that. In a lot of it's dehydrated, but have a look at that video. I'll link to it here. But also for those of you that have got criticisms of that, also have a look at the nutritional article as well, which I will link to here. It's all on my blog as well. You can find that there. That should give you plenty of ideas, Michael, and anybody else that's interested in that. And the other good thing about that article, if you go to my blog about the menu, there's lots and lots of comments where people have put other suggestions, things that they prefer, things that they've found in other parts of the world, things that they've substituted for some of the ideas that I have. Lots of great ideas there. There's no shortage of menu ideas, so go to that. How to fit a week's worth of food in a PLCE side pocket article and video on my blog, and all of that stuff is there, and that'll be super helpful for you. Anoraks for cold weather. This is from Ray Tellier. Hi Ray, good to hear from you again. He says, hi Paul, many thanks for your videos. I'm gearing up for colder weather. Not to sound like a beginner, but how does a canvas anorak keep you warm? Okay, so in really cold conditions, cotton anoraks are very good, and a lot of people these days will raise their eyebrows at that, because in the last 20 to 30 years we've all been brought up on, in the mainstream outdoors, we've been brought up on Gore-Tex, triple point and similar breathable membrane fabrics, and they are the de facto now, you know, accepted outdoor shell. And they do work very well. They work very well at keeping the rain off. They do very well at keeping the wind off. They're not as breathable as some windproof but not so waterproof products, but they do a good as a one-stop shell. You know, some sort of Gore-Tex Pro shell or Event or triple point, very, very good. That said, in the cold, you don't really need it to be waterproof. If you're thinking about a snowy environment that is going to be consistently below zero, where it's freeze dried, you don't need the waterproofing of a Gore-Tex fabric. And in fact, a lot of breathable membranes don't work very well in really cold conditions, because a breathable membrane relies on the water vapor. So you sweat, the water is vaporized by your body heat, it's maybe wicked out by a wicking base layer, and then it goes to evaporate from your body. It needs to get through that membrane, that shell layer that's on the outside. Now it needs to stay a vapor all the way through. If in going through that membrane, it's almost a barrier, but not quite. It's a barrier to water coming in because it's not a vapor, but it allows vapor out. If it gets cool enough that it condenses, then it's not going to escape the system. And that's the problem in really cold conditions with breathable membranes, is that the water doesn't transport to the outside and you get water on the inside. You can get frost on the inside, just in the same way as if you use a Gore-Tex bivy bag in sub-zero temperatures, you can get frost on the inside of the bivy bag because the vapor from your body doesn't escape the system. And the best way with a bivy bag to deal with that, by the way, just as an aside, is in the morning, turn it inside out and just shake the frost off before it melts. And that keeps the system relatively dry and moisture free. But going back to clothing, what you actually want is something that's relatively breathable compared to some of those vapor barrier or vapor allowing systems that stop the water coming in. So cotton or ventile or canvas actually works very well for that. Now, a lot of people, as I say, will raise their eyebrows at that as well, because we've been drilled, cotton is the death cloth. If you wear cotton in the outdoors, you will die. If you wear cotton close to your skin and it gets wet and then it gets cold, that is a bad place to be. Jeans are not a great outdoor clothing for the northern temperate environment either here, because when they get wet they're very hard to dry. Things like Norwegian army shirts, nice and warm in the cold. The typical old Norgie shirt that a lot of British military people wore, it's cotton with a terry looping on the inside, nice in cold dry conditions, shite when they get wet. They're just a bag of wet sogginess that you can't do anything with until you get them over a radiator or in a drying room. So what you want is not cotton close to your skin. You want merino or synthetic wicking base layers close to your skin. You want some good intermediate warm layers, and you want an outer warm layer. Again, I've got videos on layers, I've got articles on layers, I've got videos on clothing combinations. And then in terms of shell, in cold weather, the anorak, the cotton or canvas or ventile anorak, won't keep you warm in and of itself. It's not an insulating layer, but what it will do is it will allow moisture to escape efficiently. And the last thing you want to be doing in cold conditions is getting wet. You may have to regulate your activity. You may have to ventilate and waft hot air out of your clothing when you're working hard, but generally something that's as breathable as possible in terms of allowing moisture out but stopping snow and ice getting into your clothing is what you want. Cotton works very, very well for that. It's also hard wearing. If you're in the boreal forest, if you're carrying logs, if you're working hard and you're pushing through, and you're on snowshoes and you're breaking trail and you're pulling a toboggan and everything's pulling against you and you've got a cord across your shoulder, or if you're you're skiing through the woods with a backpack on, or whatever it is, if you're in cold conditions, a cotton anorak works very, very well for that. It's abrasion resistant. It's also relatively heat resistant. So if you're near hot stoves, if you're near fires, if you're having a long log fire or a smaller lunch fire outside, you are not at risk of melting it like you are with a with a petrochemical based product, which all of those breathable membrane jackets are made of. They're made of plastic at the end of the day. So the jacket itself, to answer your question, Ray, the jacket itself won't keep you warm, but what it will do is it will allow moisture out. It'll keep the wind off, and therefore the warm air close to you, warm air that's trapped inside, won't be displaced away. It will allow moisture out, and it will allow your clothing to stay relatively dry, both in terms of snow and ice getting on and moisture getting out. It will retain heat, and it will stop cold winds getting to you. So my top choice for sub-zero environments is a ventile smock, and if you're going to be at the cusp of the seasons, get a double layered ventile smock, so that if you do get a bit of rain or freezing rain, it will actually work well in those conditions as well. So that's where I'm coming from, and hopefully that gives you a suitably detailed answer for you to make some decisions about your clothing. But if you've got further questions about specific items or combinations, then just drop me a line. But in the show notes, I will link to a number of articles I've written about winter clothing. I will link to a video here as well about some of the layer combinations I use in the Northern Temperate. I talk a bit about Ventile there, but if you want the really cold stuff, go across to my blog. You will find in the show notes under Ask Paul Kirtley episode 41 links to all the relevant stuff there. There's more than I can link to in the video here for those of you that are watching on YouTube. And clearly, if you're listening via podcast, just go over, as you normally do, to my blog and get all of the links that are relevant to this episode. Okay, next one. This one is from Leah Ramika Dugan, and her question is, I've been searching for a wilderness skiing bespoke course, a few of the basics. I've just completed an expedition and wilderness medicine course, but some of the elements would be completely different having watched your video. I'm assuming, Leah, you're talking about my Fjell Tour video again. For those that have not seen that, it's a 50-minute film. It's a little feature, little documentary film about one of our trips that we made. It's not on YouTube if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening on my podcast and then you go to YouTube to try and find it. It is on my blog. I will link to it here in the video, and there'll be a link in the show notes to Fjell Tour as well. A lot of people have missed that film because it's not on YouTube, but it is a nice little film. I'm quite proud of it, and have a look at that if you've not seen it. And I think that's what Leah is referring to, because that's the main thing I've done about a wilderness backcountry skiing trip on my blog. She says, I'm not as tough as you were in the video in Norway, but would like a largely stepped down version of this type of course. Well, you never know how tough you are, Leah, until you try. A lot of people are tougher than they think they are. We're all pretty much made of the same stuff, and a lot of it's what goes on up there. And I notice you've got a doctorate, and you're interested in wilderness skills, and therefore you've probably got the right stuff up there as well to achieve what you need to achieve in the outdoors. So don't undersell yourself, but I understand, start within your comfort zone and then push. So Leah's final part of the question is, could you possibly help? I have cross-country skied, nowhere near as good and proficient, but would like to try to increase my skill level, even if I can't match your skills in the video. Well, you're very self-deprecating, Leah. Don't be so much underrating of your own abilities. If you've cross-country skied before, if you've got the determination to finish a doctorate, and you're interested in wilderness skills, wilderness medicine, then I think you can certainly undertake a wilderness skiing trip. Now, clearly you don't want to be doing that on your own. Even experienced people would, stop, probably have to think very hard about making a serious wilderness trip by skis on their own, in very tough country. But you can certainly find groups to go with, and Exodus, a company which I have no connection with whatsoever. I know Exodus do some cross-country skiing trips in Norway, and they're very clearly graded as to how difficult they are. And so you could go and choose one of those. You've skied before, you could go and choose one of those trips that was suitable for you and go out with other people that are at the same level, with a guide, with an instructor that's going to take you and look after you in that environment. And then as you build experience, you can go through the harder trips. And that's something that I would consider doing if I were you. And this is a common problem that we have, that it's the same with canoeing, it's the same with snowshoeing, it's the same with cross-country skiing, that it's something that we see other people doing. We might see an inspirational photograph on Facebook, we might read an interesting article in Sidetracked magazine, you might see one of my videos, you might see something on National Geographic Channel or Discovery Channel, and you think, I want to go and do that. But then, you might have lots of good friends, but very few of them probably are interested in doing something like that. And even if they are interested in doing something like that, maybe the amount of training, equipment purchase, etc. that's required would put a lot of them off. And so we're often in this situation where we have a real burning desire to go and do something, but we can't find other people to do it with. And so organised trips like that are often a good way to do that, you know, whether it's a canoeing trip like the ones we've just done on the River Spey, whether it's an Exodus skiing trip, whether it's another provider doing something where it's bringing together people who are like-minded. And what you may find is the people who are most like-minded on those trips, over time you might agree, well, let's do the level 2 next year. Let's go and do another canoeing trip with Paul and Ray in Canada next year. Let's go and do the level 3 skiing trip next year. We did the level 2 last year. And you go through those experiences together. And then you might even, aside from that, get together with other people that you've met on those trips who have had the same training or similar training and experience to you. You can trust them, you understand their background, you get on with them, you've kept in touch via social media or email, and you can then plan your own trips and go and do your own trips. So that's the way that I would start. If you're on your own, you've got an aspiration to go and do that, find a collective trip. And in the case of the skiing, I know that Exodus do some good trips. The Norwegian Touring Association, DNT, also do some organised trips, but I would double check to see whether or not you can, if you don't speak Norwegian, how easy it is for you to join those. But I know they do some organised tours as well, and some very good tours. So those are the two options that I would look at. The DNT, the Norwegian Trekking Association, they do some organised tours, and Exodus do some tours as well in Norway. So check those out. Okay, a couple of questions about quinzhees. From our old friend Welsby Roots, Dave Welsby on Instagram, this question is from. And he's pinched one of my photos from somewhere on my blog, and it's not from the quinzhee video he refers to, but he says, great quinzhee video, Paul. Would it be unwise to put the snow taken out on top to add thickness? In principle, Dave, there's no issue with that, because at the end of the day what you want is a space inside that is the right size, and as long as you've made a mound of snow big enough in the first place, hollowing it out will give you that internal space that you need. What you don't want to do though is make something too small with the thought that by the time I throw the stuff on the outside it will be big enough, because it won't be frozen on the outside, and then you'll dig through the crust to try and make it bigger, and you'll end up with a collapsed shelter. So as long as the mound's big enough in the first place, there's no issue with throwing it on the outside in terms of function of the inside of the shelter. The thing to think about though is, how do you know when you've dug far enough? If you watch my quinzhee video, you'll know that I just used the amount of light coming through the walls as an indicator of the thickness of the wall. Now clearly if you're putting more snow on the outside, you're going to block out some of that light coming through, and that might throw you off. But if you're using the technique where you put sticks at all of the same length through the outside, a bit like the guy from Hellraiser where all the nails sticking out, it ends up looking like that with sticks all the way. You push those in. Once you get to the end of the sticks, you know it's thick enough. If you're putting snow on the outside of that and you get to the stick, it doesn't matter, because you know that you've got to the right thickness of the frozen crusted material. It's not going to collapse the shelter. They should be strong enough to take a little bit of snow on top. The question then really is, do you want to use the snow to extend your entrance tunnel just to make it more protected, or do you want to put it somewhere else? So in principle, no issues, but just bear in mind those couple of things that I mentioned. Candles for quinzhees. We've talked about candles in snow shelters. This is another question from Welsby Roots. Actually, this is from Twitter. I wonder if the previous one was on Instagram. No, they're both Twitter actually, apologies. The previous one was from Twitter. This is also from Twitter. So two questions about quinzhees from Dave on Twitter. So we talked about having candles in snow shelters a couple of times on this episode, and this is what Wellesby's asking about. He's saying, hey Paul, in a quinzhee or other snow shelter, what kind of candle would you use? Beeswax is non-toxic. Yeah, I mean, paraffin wax is fine. Beeswax is fine. The main thing you want is something that's quite long life, i.e. long burning, and those 9-hour or even I think you can get 12-hour candle lantern candles are very good. They will burn a bit faster away from a candle lantern, but in the shelter of a quinzhee they're not going to get a lot of airflow onto them, making them burn faster, so they should burn quite a long time even in a snow shelter outside of a candle lantern, and those are the ones that I carry for snow shelters. So in my standard winter camping, winter, whether it's ski touring or snowshoeing, even if I'm going with a heated tent, I will take a couple of long life paraffin wax candles with me in case I'm snow holing or building a quinzhee. If I know I'm going to be in a quinzhee for a length of time, then I will take more, but just as part of my almost not quite survival pack, but just in case bits and pieces, I take a couple of long life candles of the candle lantern variety. You'll get those in any outdoor store, outfitters, I'm sure. Last question from Mark Spooner, and this is about toilets in cold and sweaty clothes. And his question is, hi Paul, always enjoy your YouTube videos. I've learnt so much from them and putting them into practice. I have 2 questions for you. Okay, I'll let you off. How do you deal with things like toilet issues in very cold weather when the ground is solid or you're in icy conditions? Number 2, when hiking or climbing anywhere, I tend to sweat and get hot, even in freezing weather on the hike, and then get that horrible cold, wet feeling when arrived at the destination. What can you recommend to help manage heat and sweaty clothes? Well, I'll answer the second one first, Mark. We've already talked a bit about clothes in this episode, and I won't go over what I've already said. You generally want to have a good wicking base layer. My preference in cold conditions is for a thin merino base layer next to my skin. You might get a little bit damp in wool next to your skin, but wool actually gets slightly warmer when it gets slightly damp. It doesn't stay as warm when it's completely wet. That's a common misunderstanding, but there is an exothermic reaction when wool fibers take up moisture, and that actually helps keep you warm and counteracts the fact that it's a little bit damp. But that's only a relatively small percentage moisture uptake. It will give out moisture more slowly, but it will give it out gradually. A lot of synthetic materials are great for high energy, like high energy cross-country skiing, cross-country ski racing, biathlon, mountain biking, doing really high energy stuff, trail running, fell running, those sorts of things. They get moisture away from you quickly, because you're generating a lot of heat and potentially a lot of moisture quickly. But in slightly slower, steadier conditions, that quick wicking can actually cool you down a bit too much. But then again, that's maybe what you need. Maybe you're just getting too hot, but I would imagine it's the combination. Maybe you're wearing too many layers. First off, really old principle, but it still stands true. Be bold, start cold. Many people will start a hike, particularly in cold weather, wearing what makes them feel comfortable at the beginning of the hike. Then they'll start moving, and after 5 minutes, they'll start to be too warm. And unless you adjust your clothing layers, you're going to end up continuing to generate, or at least trap too much heat, because you're going to be generating that heat anyway. You're trapping too much heat. That gives your body the signal that it's getting too hot. You start sweating, and that puts moisture into your clothing. And then, as you say, when you stop, you get that horrible cold, clammy feeling, and a physical reduction in temperature, because you can't stay warm at the end, and you put yourself at greater risk of hypothermia. So what you want to be doing is starting off feeling like, I'm a bit chilly here. On a cross-country skiing trip, I might just start off wearing a merino base layer and a shell. That's it, and gloves and a hat. And I'm cold when I'm standing still, but as soon as I start moving, I'm skiing with a backpack on, I warm up to a temperature where I'm happy. If after 10-20 minutes I am not at the right temperature, I might, if I've misjudged it and I need another layer on, then I will put another layer on. But the general mistake is that people start off their hike up a mountain, their hike in cold conditions, they're skiing in cross-country skiing in cold conditions, snowshoeing in cold conditions. They'll start off wearing too much, and then when they start exerting, they'll get too hot, they'll get sweaty. So that's the main thing to look at. Then, if you're worried about getting cold when you stop, if you stop for a quick break, if you stop to have a drink or take on a quick snack, and you're stopping more than a moment, what you want to have is at the top of your day pack or the top of your rucksack is a down jacket or a good quality synthetic jacket that squashes down, that will go over everything that you're wearing, what we would tend to call a mothership jacket. So good quality down, puff it out, put it on over the top of everything. You're not then having to take off your shell layer, put on another layer, put on your shell layer in the wind with mittens and gloves and things. Just chuck it on over the top, zip it up, maybe put a bigger hat on or put the hood up if it's got a hood, and you're going to be nice and toasty. Have your hot chocolate, have your drink, whatever you're having, chocolate bar or a cereal bar, put that away, jack it off, in your rucksack, back on, off you go. That is the best thing to do to regulate your temperature between exertion and stop. And if you do that, then you should maintain a better temperature during the day, rather than relying on trying to wear too many layers because you're worried about getting cold to start off with, and then unzipping them and venting because you're generating too much heat. Now, that said, think about other ways of ventilating. If you are generating too much heat, regardless of that, have a shell layer that's got pit zips, like ventilated armpit zips that allow moisture and air to circulate and get rid of some of that moisture there. Think about using zips on the front. You can, if you're getting way too hot, say you've got a really steep section of trail and you've just got too hot going up it, just stop, get hold of your lapels, unzip the front, and do that. Like if you're watching the video, I'm lifting, you can see what I'm doing, but if you're not, basically I'm not going to grab hold of my collar because the microphone's there and it'll go all roughly, but basically get hold of your collar and lift the clothes away from yourself and then squeeze it back in using your forearms and your elbows like a bellows, and to push out the hot air and the moisture from near your chest. A few blows like that in cold weather, you'll quickly feel like you're coming down in temperature. That's enough, and that's a really good trick that I learnt from Lars Falt, actually, working with him up in the northern forests years ago, and it really does cool you down very quickly. So that's a good trick. Right sort of headwear, often people put hats on that are too big in cold weather, and then again you lose a lot of heat from your head, but equally you can get too hot by wearing a hat that's too big. So if it's really quite cold, you don't want to be wearing no headgear, because your brain can literally get cold. You know, that brain freeze that you get from eating ice cream, you can kind of get that from hiking or skiing in cold weather without a hat on. You can be generating a lot of heat and your extremities are warm, but your head's getting a bit too cold, and that can give you bad judgment. It can give you a headache. It can make you make navigational errors. So a thin beanie, again, thin merino or similar beanie, just to keep the outside of your head warm, but you're still losing a lot of heat. And then again, when you stop, you can put a hood up, you know, an anorak hood, and then your mothership jacket hood over the top to keep that heat in without losing any more. So you need to be very active in managing your clothing, not just taking layers on and off, but using it as effectively as possible. However expensive your outdoor clothing is, it will not manage itself. Yeah, the best Gore-Tex jacket or Ventile jacket or mothership jacket or winter anorak or whatever it is that you're using, and the layers that go with it, bigger plane going over, they will not unzip themselves, the hoods will not go up and down on their own, the cuffs will not tighten and loosen on their own, gloves and mittens will not exchange on your hands on their own. You have to do that as the user. So I would recommend, be bold, start cold, make sure after 10 minutes, 15 minutes that your temperature is right, adjust layers then if necessary, putting another layer on if you're too cold. When you stop for a break, mothership on, hood up, take on, don't stop for more than about 5 minutes, everything back out, off you go again. If you're on a particularly steep or strenuous part of the trail, ventilation, armpit zips, cuffs, wafting, bellowing out hot air if necessary. Make sure you've got the right headgear on. Those are all really important elements of managing your clothing in cold conditions, particularly when you're going from exerting yourself to being stationary. And hopefully using those, you'll get to the end of your trip without being so tired, without being so dehydrated, and without having to deal with so much moisture in your clothing. Hopefully that helps you. And yes, I know some people have said to me, you repeat yourself. I know I repeat myself on some things because I'm thinking and consolidating a particular thought and adding to it as something else comes to the fore. I'm adding it, I'm adjusting what I've just said, but also at the end, I'm not repeating myself, I'm summarizing what I've just said so that it's all there as bullet points for people to take away. So rather than having to meander through everything again to make sure they've got all the points, they're all there at the end. So it's not repetition, it's summary. Before I go into a rant. Oh, toilets. You had a question about toilets. This is the danger of asking two questions in one, Mark. Toilets. How do you deal with things like toilet issues, very cold weather, when the ground is solid or you're in icy conditions? Well, in snow, the same issues with pollution of watercourses exist in winter as they do in summer, for example. So you wouldn't go to the toilet, you wouldn't defecate next to a stream or in a stream in summer because you're polluting the water. Same in the winter. You can tell where the streams are, even if they're covered over, the depressions in the snow, or even if it's frozen or not running. You can tell the low points in the landscape. Those are going to be the watercourses. Go to the toilet away from them. First off, if it's really deep snow, what we tend to do is trample an area. If we're camping in an area for more than a short period, trample an area like we would to make a tent platform, flatten it so that it's crusty on the top. We leave a snow shovel there, and then when we go to the toilet, we dig down to the ground, and then do your business, and then cover it over. Always burning toilet paper, because again, the feces will break down. Remember, all the animals are going to the toilet in the forest. You know, the moose and the reindeer and the bears and the wolves, and all these animals do shit in the woods. The old adage, does a bear shit in the woods? Yes, it does. Now, clearly, we can transfer diseases into the environment and pass them on to other humans if we're not careful about where we're going. Now, in summer months, it's best practice to dig down in the top few centimeters of the soil where most of the bacteria are, defecate in there, cover it over, again making sure you don't leave toilet paper because it takes a long time to break down. The bacteria will deal with the feces very, very quickly. In frozen ground, that's harder to do. I would suggest in the first instance, take a digging tool that allows you to dig into relatively frozen ground. If you can't get into the frozen ground, if it's snowy, then at least dig into the snow and cover it over. And as the snow melts and the sun gets on it and insects start coming out in the spring, that it will be taken care of by the environment at that time. But the important thing is to not go near to watercourses. You want any residual effects to be going into the ground and being filtered by the ground and being dealt with by bacteria, and not going into watercourses. If you're in high altitude areas where the ground is often frozen, the advice is slightly different. The advice is often to smear the feces on rock so it's spread thin so that the sun gets to it. The ultraviolet deals with any organisms there that might cause a problem. The organic matter gets dealt with by flies and other species that will feed on that. As unsavory as it seems, everything is always interested in eating something else. One animal's waste is another animal's food. You see flies on feces all over the world, but in the mountains, when there's frozen ground and there's not a lot of bacterial action in the ground, even in the summer, best practice, as far as I understand it, is to smear on a rock. Clearly don't do it near to a cabin or where somebody's going to come across it, but if you're out away from somewhere where there's an organized toilet in a cabin or a hut or what have you, and you need to go and it's not going to break down in the soil, then that smearing action is considered to be the best practice. So hopefully that helps, Mark. And that brings us to the end. So thanks again for your questions. It is cooling off here. It's towards the end of the day. It's just gone 5 o'clock here when I'm recording this at the end of the day, and I can feel the temperature dropping. It's going to be another relatively cool night, but as I say, not as cold as maybe you'd expect at this time of year. So don't think we're going to get any stars tonight. Had a good view of the Milky Way last night. Not a lot of light pollution where I am, so you could see the Big Dipper or the Plough, whatever you want to call it, part of Ursa Major. You could see Cassiopeia, and nicely you could see Cassiopeia sitting in the Milky Way there. Really nice view of the stars, and then Orion coming up later on. We had a full moon a week ago and you couldn't see many stars, but we're down to a quarter moon now when I'm recording this. It'll be probably almost no moon or a new moon by the time this comes out, in probably nearly another week's time by the time I get it up online. But this is a really good time of year to be looking at the stars as well. So if you've got any natural navigation questions, I didn't get many questions for Andy about hunting or deer stalking. I think I got one really useful one, not enough to make a show around, unfortunately. So that's been shelved for the time being. In terms of having Andy on as a guest, maybe another time. But again, as we go into the winter, if you've got any more questions about winter, camping out in cold weather, all of those sorts of things, send them in. Questions about natural navigation, particularly with the stars. This time of year is a really good time of year to be looking at the stars. So if you've got questions about that, if you're looking, you know, it's going to be dark fairly soon. I'm going to be seeing the stars this time of year 4 or 5, 6 hours earlier than I am in the summer. Great time to be out, not too late, but learning a lot about the stars and finding direction. So questions about that would be welcome. But any of your questions, as usual, I know I've got a backlog. I am actually getting through the backlog now. I had a look earlier today. I managed to get online, went through new questions. There weren't that many new questions that have come in the last few weeks. So I am actually chewing my way through the backlog as well, without their backlog being filled up. But again, if you've got seasonal questions, get them over to me and I'll get them answered. Anyway, I've rambled on for long enough. I'm going to go and finish off my day. Hopefully you have a good day and a good weekend too. Thanks for watching Ask Paul Kirtley, and I will speak to you on episode 42, and maybe we will find the answer to life, the universe and everything in that episode. Take care. Bye bye.